On this episode of China Unscripted, we answer your questions. Welcome to China Unscripted. I'm Chris Chappell.
I'm Shelley Zhang.
And I'm Matt Gnezda.
So recently we told you we were going to have Grant Newsham and Cleo Paskal on the show. We couldn't get them on at the same time, so it's just Cleo from Foundation for Defense of Democracies. Although at this point you've been on the show so much, I think it's more accurate to say Cleo from China Unscripted.
Oh, that'd be nice, dude.
Also, you probably don't want to represent Foundation for Defense of Democracies with what we're about to do.
Okay.
What are we about to do? That's so answer questions from fans?
We'll see. We'll see what the questions are.
So if the questions are really tough, can I just pretend I'm Grant Newsham and pretend it's him? I would if I could do his accent. I have no idea what his accent is.
Yeah. I've been wondering about that too.
So yeah, we got a bunch of questions from you guys for Cleo. We did do a separate podcast with Grant that may be out soon or is already out.
I'm guessing that one has come out before this one.
Are you an oracle, Shelley?
I am.
Wow.
So I have not heard these questions.
You have not, and I picked one that has a ton of writing.
And
it's
tiny
so
font. Matt printed these out,
tiny.
and they're so small.
Fortunately, I have excellent eyesight. I understand that the president of Taiwan is a separatist and that the Taiwan government, or so-called Congress, is rather very much for unification. Is the president the only thing keeping them from reunification? What if the president becomes a different one who is for unification with the government for unification? Well, it just take place without a bullet fired potentially. Thank you so much for your thoughts, Richard.
Yeah, so I think that's what Beijing is hoping for. That's the game plan. That's why they tried to rig the elections, and that's why there's an entire political party devoted to, better friendship or integration with China. There's a big section of the political community. So I think that's the hope. But clearly there is an impediment to that, which is this pesky thing called democracy and the Taiwanese people who seem to feel a little bit differently on the topic.
Yeah, I think it's a bit of a simplification to be like the president is a separatist, but the Congress
Everyone else in Taiwan wants to unify.
Yeah, that's not really politically what's happening.
Yeah. Like view on the ground in Taiwan about, well, it's not even reunification. It would be a unification since it never was unified to begin with.
It would be an invasion.
Yeah.
Like, sort of use some accurate terminology on this. But I mean, you've been there. So what do you think about if there was, say, a pro invasion KMT president that came to power, and a compliant legislature, then what happens?
Well, it almost happened in, what was that year? Was it 2000?
2020 was when,
No,
if you're
no.
talking about the one we were there. Oh,
What
the one
was the
before
Sunflower
that?
movement?
Uh-huh.
Was that 2014 too in Taiwan?
Do you
I thought it
remember?
was earlier. But I think
Or
that
2009?
to directly answer your question, I think what you'd get is Cambodia.
Do you mean
look-
coup?
No, look at
Do you mean a genocide?
the Cambodia has become basically invaded by CCP influence. So no bullets fired, but there's really strong influence. The CCP has set up their special zones there with like their casinos and everything horrible that comes along with it, the human trafficking and the prostitution and drugs and crime and all that stuff. And the elite of the Cambodian government are captured. They no longer have any meaningful democracy, even though it's technically a democracy. It's basically a one-party rule. That is the kind of, like, no one runs for office on a pro-invasion platform, but a let's work together with China platform can certainly work. And then they don't have to invade with troops. They just gradually, or in that case, very quickly take over.
Well, I mean, I think with the difference is that the CCP is not imminently planning to invade Cambodia.
They don't need to.
Well, but
It's not like an either or.
Yeah, it's not that they think of Cambodia as a, it's
Existential
part of their territory, and they must have it. So I think it's different in that sense. But What I was going to say when I was looking up the Sunflower Movement, which was in 2014, that the closest really that they came to this kind of soft takeover was essentially under Ma Ying-jeou, the last KMT president, right, from 2008 to 2016, because he was the person who had met with Xi Jinping in 2012.
And he still does.
Oh yeah, he still goes back to China and has like all of these like friendship like kind of meetings and things like that. But he was the last KMT president. He was trying to sign this free trade agreement with the CCP, and it was that triggered this whole movement of like young Taiwanese essentially going in and like briefly occupying the legislature, right, to force political change. And then a lot of those people ran for positions in the legislature and essentially changed how that body treated China. So there was no longer the ability to just push through this free trade agreement that would have flooded Taiwan with more CCP influence. And so I think since 2014, the CCP has been seeing Taiwan get further and further away from that kind of no shots fired, easy takeover.
It's
thing.
not just the separatist president.
Yes, and it is very much, I think, a big reason that the DPP, which people are still like often unhappy with politically, had been in the presidency for so long, is because still people dislike the KMT more because they know that that would open the door to the CCP.
Yeah, and I think the concern around the previous election was that it become a Hong Kong, right?
Oh yeah, I mean I don't know so much about 2024, but 2020 when we were there, that was definitely
it was fresh on everyone's mind.
Yes, a lot of people told us they were voting because of Hong Kong.
People from Hong Kong were there. Yeah.
Yep.
Okay.
Let's do another question.
Another question.
Done.
I guess
I can
you
go home
don't
now,
get
right?
to. No. We got. I don't think you get to choose.
Apparently not. As long as I also don't have to do the answers, this is working out great.
Yeah.
Okay.
Look how she's flipped this on us. This is subversion.
Art of War, or the Indian version, Arthashastra.
Right.
This is another Richard. Richard D. Lake asks, do you see Vietnam playing a major role in a conflict with the CCP, or might they be a significant deterrent to keeping China from going too far down the road of conflict in the first place? Like, is he asking that if Vietnam is going to hold back China?
I think that's what it's saying. What do you think?
What do you think?
Nice try, Cleo.
We know. We've read the Arthur Shakazula.
Yeah, I haven't even read it. Yeah, so Vietnam is an interesting one because they will fight, and they've just signed a defense agreement with India. The Prime Minister of Vietnam was just in India, sort of toughening things up with that, with what they can deliver. But their general, what I was told when I was there was their basic principle is we can't stop the Chinese from coming in, but we can make it hell for them once they're here. And if you think about how their last fights with the Chinese went, and in fact with others, including the French and the Americans, that's largely kind of the way they've approached it. We don't have the leverage to keep you from coming in, but we want you to know if you do try to come in, it'll be pretty tough.
Well, like on a similar note, like that's why I wish Taiwan had a much more robust gun culture. So if China comes in,
yeah, and expand it. I mean, again, if I were Grant Newsham, this is my really bad Grant Newsham.
You sounded even more Canadian.
Yeah. Then what he's talked about a lot of things like mines and like just expand that defense perimeter and not just be a porcupine, a hard spot to hit, which is I think kind of what Vietnam is looking at, but have the ability to strike back. If it is an invasion, have the ability to strike back. And I'm not sure that's what Vietnam is thinking. But Vietnam is definitely trying to keep the Chinese away from attacking it, and China did attack it, and several times, and the Vietnamese have pushed them back. So perhaps a model to follow, and to help reinforce so that China would know that it would have multiple hard targets in the neighborhood. But it's not. It hasn't really been taking a lead, I'd say, on helping to secure other countries in the region. I don't know if you've seen something different.
So, in other words, Taiwan should be more like the Viet Cong.
Yeah. Not towards their own people.
Is Vietnam at risk of being attacked by China? I mean, there's the disputes in the South China Sea.
Well, they have been. So the oil platform stuff. I mean, there's that video you can still see on YouTube of PLA mowing down Vietnamese who were standing up to their knees in water, during that attack. But which apparently they've used for recruitment videos. I mean, this is not a quiet relationship, but at the same time, the PRC is doing what it always does, which is push in a lot of business and try to corrupt the political process. And if a lot of those, not a lot, but at least some of those Vietnamese factories have Chinese ownership, and that's been a big issue. Some of them were attacked a few years ago, so it's not binary. The PRC is very good at using a whole toolkit to try to create at least docility in the target country, if not complicity. So even if they're signing the defense agreement with India, that doesn't mean China's given up on being able to make Vietnam less of a problem for it.
All right, let's get another question here. That's RRPC7YV asks.
Oh, that.
Yeah,
clever person. I know that person.
Say where it's from.
This question says, for Cleo Paskal, are you of French origin?
J'apprécie la question, puis ça me fait plaisir de vous répondre, mais je ne suis pas.
It's like nails on a chalkboard. It's just grating.
I am not, and it's that cunning little K that slipped into the Pascal that will tell you that it was actually a much longer Eastern European name that got effectively Ellis Island, so to speak, on passing the border. So I am not, but I did grow up in rural Quebec, and I went to French schools for the first 11 years of my education. Ça suffit?
I guess, yeah. And you were always nice enough to bring us some maple syrup sometimes.
J'essaie.
Yeah.
Do you want me to answer all the rest of the questions in French?
No, that's less than
as
ideal.
long as we don't have to answer them in French. You can feel free to answer them in French, as far as I'm concerned.
Dwayne Lukasek asks, will the U.S. organize a recreation of the old CETO-like treaty, including India, Vietnam, and others, against China to show unity? Today, these countries seem disorganized in their response to Chinese aggression.
So what the U.S. seems to be doing is creating a bunch of mini-laterals. So we saw it recently with the Japan, South Korea, U.S. thing that's been going on. But I can tell you from the Indian perspective, they feel like they're not being included. So, and in fact, they feel like the Quad is in abeyance. Quad needs top-level meetings, and there was one that was scheduled for early this year in Delhi, but President Biden couldn't attend, canceled. In retrospect, that may be for health reasons, and that was a concern at the time, that was one of the reasons. But without that kind of top-level leadership, the feeling is that the Quad is not all that it could be at the moment. And similarly, the feeling is that, and you hear this a lot in Indian strategic circles, that the U.S. is pushing ahead with a lot of these other clusters like AUKUS or Japan, South Korea, and others. There are others as well, but none of them are including India. So that's disconcerting. And and there's some other things going on as well. There's for example, I don't know whether there's going to be a question about Bangladesh, but during the depends also on when this is going to air, but there have been some real problems in Bangladesh. The prime minister fled the country, and in the immediate aftermath of that, there have been just horrific targeted attacks on Hindus, like just the most horrible, heartbreaking things are going on, and there's been at this point, sort of a few days out, very little response from the U.S. on that, and that's making the Indian strategic community talking openly about what the U.S. role could have been in what was going on. That's the level of lack of trust there is right now with the U.S. Because remember, there was the whole thing with Afghanistan, where $80 billion worth of weapons were left behind in the hands of people who are not fond of India. Then there's this lack of engagement with the Quad. So in terms of these alliance things, for me, if you are really serious about China, you want to work with India. India is redesigning its military. It's banned TikTok. It's banned WeChat. It's very far ahead on understanding PRC political warfare. And the messages that are being sent, or that the messages that are being, to be accurate, received by the defense and strategic community in India is that the U.S. is not, at least State Department, maybe defense, but State Department is not serious about engaging with India on this stuff.
They should just be patient. We don't really have a president right now.
Yeah.
As a couple months, we'll have someone.
Mm-hmm. Yes. So and it's useful to read the Indian press to see what they think about the various options.
Uh-huh.
Yeah, and what that might mean for India. And a lot of it is in the context of China. So they'll look at Harris-Walt's ticket in the context of what do they think about China? Because from that strategic community's perspective, if you're not worried about China, you're not going to take India as seriously as you could. If you are, then you do. So it's India should be taken on its own merits, but it tends in Washington, at least in the strategic community, to be a byproduct of that individual's view of China.
Shelley, another question?
Or any thoughts on that? What do you guys think about these?
No, we don't have any thoughts. You're trying to turn this on us again, Cleo.
Yeah.
We didn't invite you on so we could talk amongst ourselves. We do that plenty. But usually the direction goes in talking about Battlestar Galactica.
Yeah, so I heard that you described the ending to Shelley, and it was like 10 minutes of spoilers.
Yeah, that got cut.
Oh, okay.
Were you?
I'm interested.
You're interested in Battlestar Galactica spoilers?
Hey,
watch this?
So Shelley, you want to pick a question out of the hat?
Yeah, I'll do that. Tony Zafiropoulos asks, what is the number one thing we can do as concerned citizens for the upcoming conflict? Prep?
Okay, well, it depends on what you think the conflict is going to look like. I think the best thing you can try to do is do everything you can to try to make it not happen. And the way to do that, I would argue, is to make the calculus. If the conflict that you're worried about is some sort of PRC attack on the U.S., for example, cyber or something like that, just have people in power who have made it clear that the PRC is going to pay, and that the CCP, and especially the CCP leadership in particular, is going to pay. So instead of, if you want to prepare for the inevitable, then obviously the easy hit is going to be something cyber related. But that would be a problem in case of sunspots or big environmental disaster or anything like that anyway. So coming from rural Quebec, you always want to prepare for the worst anyway. But I would, whatever effort you're going to put into that, put a percentage of effort into trying to make sure it doesn't happen in the first place. Whether that's getting involved in politics or media or talking to your friends or whatever, but don't just sit back and think that you don't have an option or a role to play.
That's good.
All right. DMW Fourth says, my question would be, how long does Canada and the USA plan on eating cookies in the bed with China?
Well,
I like that metaphor.
Yes, speaking as a Canadian, I think we're very comfortably under the duvet with a Costco-sized crate of maple cookies, and unless something dramatically changes at the next election, you can expect a lot of crumbs for a while. In terms of the U.S., what you're seeing is, yes, there's all of this happening at the federal level, but a lot of individual states are making legislation to try to get the crumbs out of their beds. So, Oklahoma, for example, trying to create a situation where the PRC can't just buy large tracts of farmland near critical infrastructure or anything. So it's not the U.S. is much less monolithic in its response than Canada is. So there is hope that what you see in certain states in the U.S., that China is very good at getting in subnational and trying to disrupt things at the local level, and there's starting to be pushback at that local level. So I wouldn't give up on the U.S. But
Canada. So like Alberta can't do something major if Trudeau or one of his ilk is.
I mean, in theory. Yeah. I mean, it is a federalized system, and Canada does have these opt-out clauses in the Constitution. Quebec has its own whole sets of regulations around a lot of different things, but then there's no the dominant discussion in the major media. There might be concern, but there isn't, I think, an awareness of how serious the issue is and how deeply problematic it is for Canadian population, society, and economy. So I don't see the momentum. I see a lot more fight back south of the border than I see people talking north of the border, but there really isn't as much action.
It's so weird to think of the U.S. as south of the border.
Yep.
My paradigm has shifted.
Yep.
Should we do a lightning round?
Yep.
Okay,
we need an egg timer.
Yeah, that's how you do it, Shelley. You just reach in and pull one out. What? Germ War writes, what role might Chinese domestic opinion play in a Taiwan invasion scenario? We hear that the CCP's rule might be endangered if it ever lost Taiwan, but would it? If a Taiwan invasion became a protracted, high-casualty effort, would the loss of so many young men from one-child families create an effective backlash that could lead to a withdrawal? Or would Chinese nationalism encourage the PRC to continue the war?
So this one I will legitimately kick back to you because you guys know more about what's going on inside of China than I do.
Yeah. I mean, I think it's hard to get a good sense of how the Chinese people feel because, they can't freely say. We do see more and more pushback to Xi Jinping and the Chinese Communist Party post-zero COVID.
Yeah, I mean, but all of these things are local and small
And
right
isolated.
now. And isolated. So it's hard to say. Even zero COVID, it took 2 years before people really got fed up enough to start protesting in the streets. So I don't know how bad the casualties would have to get for there to be
and how would they even know?
Yeah, that's the other thing. If there's a way to they hid how many PLA soldiers died
With the border.
And go on, yeah.
Yeah. So how I think it's I wouldn't count on that as being what stops the CCP from invading.
They'll be told the war effort is going great.
I mean, kind of like what's happening in Russia in a certain sense, right? Where for a long time, the actual casualties, you don't actually have a good idea.
Yeah. So I think it is a mistake to bet Taiwan on there being a backlash. Lightning round.
Okay. Biggest Thickest says,
Nice.
would be
I
the-
get it.
what would be the best approach to containing/combating CCP influence look like in relation to the global community, impeding CCP attempts to erode the sovereignty and stability of vulnerable nations, preferably without a direct or proxy conflict?
So for me, one of the main conduits for that kind of PRC influence operation is corruption. So going after corruption, and I've been somewhat shocked to find myself saying this, but I think the answer is more lawyers. So if you send, yeah. So if you go to a place like Palau, for example, where you've got this Chinese money coming in and corrupting the political process, the attorney general, and this is a call out to anybody out there who is a lawyer. The attorney general Palau is looking to hire lawyers who are willing to go after some of these tough money laundering cases, PRC linked drugs cases, prostitution, influence peddling, all that stuff. Palau is beautiful. It is relatively well paid. And if you have a US law degree, you're in pretty good shape because the system is very similar.
You heard it here first.
Yep. So that sort of thing, actual rule of law stuff, the PRC does not like. And just cleaning up those systems gives you the ability to then have a free press, an unbiased judiciary, more democracy, all of those things that, again, are good for humanity and bad for the Chinese Communist Party.
We're doing pretty well. These are taking a minute and a half.
All right. William Hart asks, China is known for playing the long game. What can the West, or more specifically the U.S., gain if we adopt the same strategy as the CCP?
Well, I mean, I guess is that possible for a democratic system like the United States has, a Republican system where it's so hard to make any changes and decisions?
Well, we have a guest, Chris.
I know, but this was the whole point. She was throwing it around.
So the question
It's a
is, can we
discussion.
have a long game?
Can we have a long game? Yeah.
So I would argue that democracy is the long game. And just
boom.
Yeah.
Mm.
Yeah, and just because you have a long game doesn't mean the game is any good. So yeah, China's got a long-term plan, but the plan is based on communism, right? On an autocratic system that has killed tens of millions of people and ultimately failed in most of the places that, and not just communism, but just that sort of autocratic dictatorship. I mean, it lasts for a while, but then it kind of fails. Whereas democracy in the system that was set up by, or republicanism, if you want to be accurate.
I get yelled at every time I just say a democracy. It's not a democracy.
Yes. But that whole thing of rule of law and transparency, accountability, and that is a long-term plan, that has the safety valves and the checks and balances and all that sort of stuff. So you need to protect that.
Yeah, I wonder if that's kind of that idea that China has the long game and the U.S. is the democracy is so
Chaotic.
Yeah, it's like I was thinking it's like the CCP political warfare thing about how democracy is chaotic, which is the line that they push all the time.
But that you can call it chaotic or you can call it adaptive, right? So I mean, it's chaotic because it keeps finding and adjusting. If it's healthy, it's when you try to block it and manipulate it that you end up with real problem.
I mean, the U.S. did beat the Soviet Union.
Yeah,
We can beat China.
Yeah, you didn't beat Canada. That's Canada calling in to remind you.
That's a really annoying timer, Shelley.
Okay. People yell at me for taking too long.
Here, do you want me to read one?
question?
Okay, sure.
Yell at me for trying to keep us on.
Yeah, maybe that should tell you something about yourself, Shelley.
Okay.
You got to shape up. People yelling at you all the time.
Somyi asks, what color socks do you have on?
Oh, commando, no socks. Yeah, No, this is my secret plan. I was actually talking to you about this today. OnlyFans, just feet.
There
Wait.
there is a reason that Chris is not sitting on the end of the table.
What's the secret, Chris?
Oh, the secret is you have to pay $9.95 a month to find out.
To find out what color socks you're wearing.
$9.95 Canadian? That might be worth it. But US, I'm not sure.
Oh, well, we'll see what the market has to say.
Next one. Dennis6416 ask Cleo, that's me, when will India cut ties with BRICS and Russia strategically for the West and the US to take them seriously? The non-aligned thing doesn't work in this case, as far as I'm concerned, at least. Thank you.
I wonder what Nalapat would say.
Well, so I understand the concern, and I wouldn't call it non-aligned. So I can tell you what the Indians say about this, which is that they would much prefer to be in the room and try to mitigate the direction that this stuff is going in. And this specific example is there was an attempt at the BRICS meeting to set up a BRICS currency. And if India is in the room, they can torpedo it. And yes, there's China and Russia, but then there's, as you know, BRICS is growing exponentially, and there are all these other little countries on the margins. And I think India, talk about playing a long game, is hoping to develop or to be there to be able to develop those other relationships with those other countries and to mitigate some of the things that would be very bad, not just for the West, but also for India, like a BRICS currency, and to develop these other relationships on the side. It's what we saw them do at the G20, for example. So I don't think of it as non-alignment. I think of it as an attempt at realignment. So trying to, there are a lot of countries out there that don't want to deal with the CCP, and they're not super happy with the West right now. So they're kind of floating in the middle, and I think India is trying to be in the room to, whether it's successful or not, it was successful at the G20, try to create a realignment around a different set of options and values that isn't necessarily what the current iteration of the West, especially, there were a lot of concerns around the Ukraine and sanctions and things, and whether that the US might suddenly decide any other country gets hit like that. That created a lot of fear, and China. So I think that's what they're doing. And in that context, I don't see them pulling out because it doesn't benefit them to not be in the room when these decisions are being made.
Now, how is that different to the engagement idea with China, that we should be in the room with them, we need to work with them?
They're not in the room to work with China. They're in the room to see what China's trying to do and then make sure China's not doing anything that hurts India. It's a different approach. Yeah. Okay. All right. I'm gonna take one more and then get past that. I'm enjoying the short things.
I'm just like, I feel like, Chris, you have just let Cleo take over, and you're just like, okay, this is fine.
Yeah. No. Okay. All right, Johnny J. Why do Muslim majority governments turn a blind eye to the atrocities the CCP commits against Uyghurs?
Yeah, good question. Next.
Money probably.
One part of it, which is just horrific, is that some from those Muslim majority countries, according to the congressional investigations, are going to get organ transplants from Muslims in China. And they like the fact that the organs are halal. So, yeah, why aren't they doing it?
Yeah, that is not kosher.
No, that is pretty horrific.
Yeah, I made a little organ harvesting joke there.
Yeah.
I got it.
Yeah.
Yes.
Yes, just the rest of us did not want to laugh at your organ harvesting joke.
I mean, you try to make an organ harvesting joke. Dave.
Challenge accepted.
Oh, God, this is how we get canceled. Dave, how freaked out is China about North Korea's latest provocation, moving nuclear-capable missile launchers to the front?
From my understanding of the China-North Korea relationship, China could shut North Korea off very quickly if it wanted. So I don't think it's particularly concerned. I think North Korea is trying to play the Russia-China game, but China has so many cards to play against North Korea. I don't think they have a lot of maneuvering room.
Yeah, it's basically China supporting North Korea.
Insider says, does she have total control over the party, or does the Xiao Ziming, I think it's supposed to be Jiang Zemin, faction still exist in a way that could lead to a successful coup? Would China be better off under this faction?
Over to you.
I'm going to say that China would not be better under the Jiang Zemin faction. Whether there's enough of them to actually, I don't know. Do you think there's enough to actually stage a coup against Xi Jinping?
Well, I think it's a little more complicated now because now there's just people who are opposed to Xi Jinping. They're not necessarily like Jiang Zemin clique people. I don't think she has absolute power. I don't think anyone really ever has absolute power because you always have different things you have to, different people you have to work with. But yeah, Xi's position is definitely rocky, which is why you saw at the recent Third Plenum so much about like, hey, everyone, party core.
Which is me.
Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, I don't think that Xi Jinping, I think they have enough power to force Xi Jinping to do some things or to not do some things, but I don't know if that would actually manifest as a hide the body situation where like they would actually seriously take him down at this point.
Yeah. Well, here's the other danger. Remember what happened when Mao was worried about losing power in '66. He launched the Cultural Revolution to basically build up popular support for him as the cult personality as a way to suppress his own political enemies at a high level. And China suffered a horrible decade because Mao was fearful of losing power.
So who is Mao in this scenario?
Xi Jinping, but of course the circumstances are very different in a lot of ways. And that you may not see a cultural revolution, but I'm saying that a dictator who's scared of losing power to another faction could do something crazy or terrible. This isn't a reason to support
invade Taiwan.
Yeah, like invade Taiwan. I'm not saying that like we should support Xi Jinping because if we don't, he's going to invade Taiwan. I'm just saying that's often how these things play out. So there's no solution to this, but it's, what to look out for. Do you have an answer to this question, or should I just go on to the next one?
I just don't think that there's any good leadership
that under communism.
Yeah, that's right. Yeah. So
what is the good leadership of communism? Star Trek.
Oh, there you go.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Margaratum asks, if ever China advances their move, then they outsource armies from different countries. For example, Myanmar, Vietnam, Laos. How would you respond? Will you stop the source from providing or just ignore the facts and treat them just as CCP/PLA armies too?
Yeah, I guess that's like if China starts using mercenaries or other militaries.
Yeah.
Like in those countries or in other countries?
I think the idea is that if they were able to somehow like start fighting a war and then they got troops from Vietnam or Laos or Myanmar involved,
there's no way Vietnam is going to be helping
Well,
China.
yes. I'm not sure the premise of this actually
Well, for example,
out,
there are Maoists that are China-backed in a lot of locations, including in India.
That's true.
Right. So I mean, the question is if it's about those troops coming and fighting on behalf of China in another location or in those countries themselves, which is what's happening already. And regardless, you go to the source. I mean, to my mind, you go to the source on all of this. And a lot of it comes down to money. And you can, it would be very helpful to broaden out any fight back from the kinetic to these other political warfare levers as well. So if you, for example, In 2014, the Maldives was having an election, and there was a PRC, pro-PRC candidate and a not pro-PRC candidate. And it turned out that the pro-PRC candidate won, even though he wasn't projected to. And one of the factors was the PRC was running money into Sri Lanka to pay Maldivians living in Sri Lanka to do overseas voting for that candidate. And it was very difficult to track that if you're just looking domestically and trying to guess the way the election would come out. Okay, go after those Chinese banks. Those Chinese banks did illegal election manipulation in a third country, yank their licenses. Similarly, if you're running money to Maoists or you're doing any of that sort of stuff, start going after that kind of thing. Start using those sanctions, start delisting those banks, start, kicking those companies off the stock market, all that sort of stuff. And broaden out the toolkit for retaliation. Start lighting fires on their turf. Don't just let them start fires on your turf.
I think that's a good point. We have to take the fight to them in the ways that we can. Do you want to?
Yeah, sure. And then I'll
come off for you. Bob Zanger asks, either can answer this. I guess it's going to be you. What can be done to stop the CCP from invading Taiwan?
So as Grinch Newsham, I would say that because he's written, in fact, a whole chapter about this in the book, The Boiling Moat, which I think you did you discuss that? That was that Pottinger book. You talked to Pottinger about it.
Yeah. Do we have the book? It doesn't matter.
We
probably do.
We do,
Yeah.
but it's not. I mean, it's actually on my desk because I was reading it recently.
Oh, so you can answer.
No, I think this is for you to answer.
So again, make it really, really clear to the leadership in Beijing that there would be a lot of pain inflicted on them personally, as that if they were to make this kind of move. So the argument is that the CCP isn't going to start a war unless it's very sure it's going to win, completely sure it's going to win. And there are two things. One is, are they going to win? The other is, what does winning actually look like? Or more to the point, what does losing look like? So if you can make it clear that not only is Taiwan a hard target, and you can do that in all of those ways that we've discussed, but also I have to say that the Taiwanese really need to start paying their military properly and equipping them properly and giving them the prestige that it needs. Because, and this is something Newsham has written about recently, if you think that the U.S. is going to come in and protect you, you're basically asking people from Kansas to die for you. Well, if you're going to do that, then you better have skin in the game. You better be willing to put your people right up on that front line as well, and they better be willing to fight. And so I don't know whether that's Second Amendment for Taiwan and all that stuff, but also the kind of appropriate weaponry in terms of drones and all that stuff. But at the same time, make it very clear to that decision-making cluster in Beijing that they will never be able to travel to a country that is part of the free world. Any assets they have there will be seized. All of their private stuff is going to be published and put up all over the internet. All of those weapons should be made very clear to the PRC. Now, they'll have their own weapons to push back with, but if you think that, as many of us do, that if Taiwan falls, you have this cascading effect all the way down that first island chain, but also U.S. reputation is just finished. So this really is that important. Then you put all of those levers on it and you make them just not be willing to do it in the first place.
Right. Especially if you make it such that winning is a Pyrrhic victory for them.
Yeah, and that they can't. What does winning look like? Okay, so you invade, but can you hold it? I mean, that's what the Vietnamese will say, right?
Yeah, they hold it, but they never get to do any trade with the West again.
Yeah.
And then their economy completely tanks. So they're much worse off.
Yeah. And I think it's worth disaggregating the general Chinese economy from the economy of the leadership, right? So that leadership targeting, they don't really care how many people starve in the countryside. They've proven that, but they care about their own preservation. So figuring out, and that's why, for example, Rubio has had this request in for the for the intelligence community to produce a report on Chinese leadership assets, right? That should all be made public so that you know what to target. They've been very slow. They're legally obliged to produce it, and they've been very slow about it. But getting that made more public so that you know what tools you have in the toolkit would be very helpful. Yep.
Mervyn asks, after the CCP collapses, would totalitarians and others like communists and pro-communists, for example, ByteDance, attempt to rise up and regain power in China again, or they can't do it at all anymore as the post-CCP Confucian-style democratic China ends up becoming like India?
As far as I understand the current economic model in China, it is intricately linked to the way the Chinese Communist Party operates. So I don't know what would spring out afterwards. I mean, they're obviously extremely good Chinese entrepreneurs. I mean, you see it in Taiwan, and it's, they came out of similar systems, at least initially, and then developed totally differently. So it's not, something would come out of that population, but this economy that the CCP has currently is developed in tandem with a very specific political system.
I think what makes it challenging is, you want to look at what do you need to have a stable China after the fall of the CCP? Like, you need to have the CCP gone, but you also, like, the natural state of things is a free market. But in order for it to operate effectively and not have it become like oligarchies and whatever, you need a stable currency, you need roads, bridges, and ports, and you need a legal system that's capable of fairly resolving disputes, right? Otherwise, you just get like what post-Soviet Russia has, which is oligarchies that are not, in some ways, not all that different from the previous system.
Well, so this is the important thing, because it needs to be treated like Germany post-World War II, not the post-Soviet countries, where there's still a lot of the Soviets, there's a lot of the communists still hanging around, still being in power. And then you need a legal system to like determine what do you do with somebody who was a Communist Party member.
Right. It's less important that it's a Confucian-style legal system than that it's a fair and just system. And there are many fair and just systems that can be, used. The question is, is it one that can maintain that integrity?
Yeah, and just following up on the point that you made about the Soviets. So one thing about about these sorts of communist systems is that there's a very big component of organized crime that supports the system, right? So, I mean, Putin came out of the organized crime world and into leadership, and if you have that, again, we will invoke the Newsham, who says that if you look at the Chinese communist system, if you want to understand it, then just watch the entire box set of Sopranos and you'll understand the system, right? So if you if the Communist Party falls away, I think very quickly you actually get back to kind of a warring states, like criminal warring states type situation. And it's questionable whether it would maintain its territorial integrity, which, as you all know, is much more expansive than China's normal territorial size, which I think is probably the fundamental fear of the Chinese Communist Party, is that it breaks up into pieces, which is also why you hear in Asia a lot of strategists saying that's the goal, is to break it into 5 pieces or 6 pieces.
Yeah, because I think also it's important to remember that communism is not just a government in power, it's an ideology. And that ideology just doesn't disappear overnight. People have been born and raised and educated in that system.
Buddy McMasterson 705 asks, to distinguish him from the other Buddy McMastersons.
The other 704 Buddy McMastersons.
But it's a good question.
Yeah.
The Pacific Island nations are each quite small. Why is it critically important to ensure these nations do not become Chinese vassals, i.e., or e.g., attempts to shift politics on the Solomons, i.e., how much more difficult is it to regain these islands in the event of a larger conflict? Parentheses, perspectives on logistical challenges of hopping, island terrain, weather, etc.
Well, that's like how many questions were in that one question?
Well, a bunch, but they're all right in Cleo's wheelhouse.
They are, and they're accurate, interlinked questions that are the questions being asked by Indo-Pacific Command, for example. So the fact, yes, some of them are geographically small in very large ocean territories, which just increases the importance of that piece of land. So from a logistical perspective, there's that old saying of amateurs talk strategy and professionals talk logistics. So those specks, the more distant they are and the more isolated they are, the more important they are, because that's where you can resupply or go into harbor or things like that. So they are incredibly important. How difficult is it to regain? I would argue that right now it's not difficult to regain at all. All you need to do is send in the lawyers. Send in people who would help them extricate the corruption from their systems. And the local populations want sovereignty and independence and free exchange of ideas and religious freedom and all the things that you'd think they would. And they're a lot of honest, hardworking, principled people who, given the space to do that, would do it. But they're being strangled by this creeping ivy of corruption. So if you can help liberate them from the corruption, they'll make sure that they are those secure islands all the way across the region, and you won't have to try to go in kinetically, which is a horrific concept 80 years after 100,000 Americans died in that region the last time around.
Well said. How can we help fight the CCP? From Shannon Newman. Hey, Shannon.
So it depends on who you are. So what your personal toolkit is, but everybody can, and strengthening yourself, your family, your community, your society, is not just going to help you so-called fight the CCP, but fight any malign influence. Because the CCP is bad, but there are others out there that are also trying to create absolute chaos within free societies. So at the very least, help understand, if you're an American, why your country is really exceptional. Go back, take a look at some of those founding documents, try to understand your system, and try to figure out how to strengthen your system. And that could be get involved in the school board and make sure that the schools are teaching things that help strengthen communities and gain an understanding of why freedom is important. I mean, you'd think it would be self-evident, but sometimes it's not. And then if you do that, if you understand why freedom is important, you don't have to specifically explain why the CCP is a problem, because you'll see it, and you'll also see why other things are not great. So it's very hard to say specifically without knowing what somebody's individual options are. But at the very least, getting involved in your community and having these discussions and talking about why it's important is relevant. You guys?
All right, Scott Payne says, given the CCP's strategy to soft attack the USA using land acquisitions, fentanyl, infrastructure hacks, infiltrating universities, stealing intellectual property, and on over a time frame that greatly exceeds our election intervals, do we have any counter strategies that do not involve military assets and economic sanctions, such as supporting the people of China, Hong Kong, and Taiwan against the CCP, or offering superior development project support globally? Do we think beyond 4 years?
That's sort of the long game issue we were talking about earlier.
Yeah. So you can see, I mean, again, certain states are trying to pass legislation to keep the CCP out of farmland or out of critical infrastructure, things like that. So there are, it is a problem. It's not just 4 years. In many cases, it's 2 years, because that's also a congressional cycle. But there are other mechanisms that can put things in place. So if your legislature, your state legislature, blocks CCP investment within a certain radius of a military installation, for example, yes, the next administration could come in and change it, but it takes an effort. So if you get control over the entropy in the system, if you over kind of the continuation in the system, then the other side has to fight to try to degrade that. So it's not, don't just give up on using the democratic process to achieve these goals. In fact, really don't. I mean, use it. And this applies to viewers everywhere, including Canada. But that long-termism, again, comes back to, I think, understanding that the fundamentals of free societies is the long-term plan. So reinforcing that aspect of the long-term plan, however you can, is a critical element of winning, of surviving.
Last question, probably.
Last question. This is from Zephyr Chan, and he actually has 3 questions, but I'm going to just ask one of them. What's the China policies of both U.S. presidential candidates?
So when is the show going out? do we know?
Let's assume we're talking about Trump and Harris.
Yeah. So for Vice President Harris, I don't know. Do you guys know?
Don't know much about it.
I don't know. And one thing that surprised me, or that I've sort of noticed over the last many years, is that it's very hard to know what a president is going to do once they take office. And like, for example, when Trump was first elected, one of the first things that happened is, I think it was in December of 2016, he took a phone call from Taiwanese President Tsai Ing-wen. And I was like, is he stupid or is he brilliant? And like, it was just like, I still didn't know what to think. And then, his first couple of years, his China policy was like, when his Secretary of State, Rex Tillerson, were trying to like make these trade deals with China. And I just didn't think it was going in a good direction. Eventually that did change. And that administration took things in a very different direction, one that has set up the U.S. for a much stronger position against China. I wasn't clear what on earth Biden would do. I thought it might be a continuation of the Obama era policies, but it wasn't really. It was more of a continuation of the Trump era policies in many respects. And although I won't say his State Department has done a good job, he's pledged to defend Taiwan. He encouraged and signed the CHIPS Act. He's expressed support for some of the groups the CCP is harassing, like Falun Gong. I think, you just don't know. So what on earth would Harris do? And even what would Trump do? Because it's a different era now. It's a very difficult, unknowable answer.
Yep. Any other last minute ones?
Let's do one more question so Cleo can actually answer.
Did you find any, Shelley?
All right, I kind of want to answer the second part of this, but not the first part. So I don't know.
So answers.
So just read the question and
Okay, well, the question is from Tau GDS that says, I know it's come up a couple of times before, but I'd really like a discussion on what you all think a Confucian democracy would be like, the potential ways it could be similar or different than Western-style democracies. Also, ask Cleo if she's willing to apologize on behalf of Canada for her nation managing to take the wonderful idea and national dish of the Isle of Man, cheesy chips and gravy, and ruined it on all 3 points by using fries, brownish water, and cheese curd instead.
Well, as a Canadian, I will apologize for anything. So let me begin by I can apologize in both official languages, since I think you're talking about the Quebec national dish of poutine, which, by the way, is also exactly the same way the leader of Russia is pronounced and spelt in French. So I think we've insulted that dish on multiple fronts.
But does the dish look good shirtless on a horse?
I think that dish it's just the dripping gravy over the lumpy cheese and the crispy fries.
Stop. We haven't had lunch yet. I'm getting me hungry.
We're back to your OnlyFans on,
The OnlyFans is just Chris eating poutine.
With no socks.
$9.95 a month.
Yeah.
People would pay for that, I think.
Well, that's what I'm afraid of finding out.
Yeah.
So yes, as a Canadian, and I think that the statement is normally, as a Canadian, I apologize, and then it's just kind of fill in the blank. So if you want it to be for poutine, it'll be for poutine. The only thing I won't apologize for is the War of 1812.
Ooh. Them's fighting words.
Someday we'll have our inevitable war.
Mm-hmm.
Can I give you one War of 1812 anecdote?
All right, this will send us off.
Okay.
But so the audience knows, because not everyone knows, that the War of 1812 is when the Canadians attacked the U.S., but it was technically the British in Canada who were running things who did it.
Yeah, Canada didn't actually exist yet, but we're going to pretend it's Canada.
Mm-hmm.
And we went and burnt the White House, and we chuckle every time we hear your national anthem, because your national anthem is basically, "Yay, the Canadians didn't manage to get our flag this time."
I hate you and your people.
So if you end up going to the Champlain, New York, which is just south of the Canada-U.S. border, there is a place nearby called Fort Blunder, where after the War of 1812, the Americans thought, "Oh, damn it, we're going to have to do something in case they come down again." So a couple of years and a large amount of money was spent building a fort. And then after a couple of years, they discovered they had built it on the wrong side of the border. So they had built us a fort, which we were very grateful for. Now, being Americans, you've built a fort on the wrong side, on the other side of the border. What do?
We
Change
changed
the border.
Exactly.
That's power projection.
Yeah. So a few decades later, a treaty was signed, and now Fort Blunder is back in the United States of America.
So not such a big blunder after all. we just took over part of Canada. Mic drop.
So it is kind of like the CCP salami slicing accidentally. It's like they did build their artificial islands, and they're like, "Well, these are ours now." And then we built a fort, and we're like, "Well, this is not Canada anymore."
Mm-hmm.
I have a question for Cleo. Oh, say, can you see that our flag was still there?
I mean,
but the fact that you even had to question it is like a bonus on our side.
that actually reminds me of the Letterkenny. I think it's Letterkenny where there's the national anthem played at a hockey game. Have you seen that?
I've seen them all, but I don't know if I've seen them. Yeah.
I think it's this thing where it's a Canadian versus U.S. hockey game. So they play both national anthems, but the Canadian national anthem is just some like fourth grade kid playing it on the recorder. And then there's like a smash cut to the American national anthem, which is somebody singing the national anthem pretty like decently well, not like, it's not Whitney Houston, but it's a decent rendition compared to like a fourth grade off-key recorder sampling of "O Canada." So I think it was a joke about how each country treats their national anthem.
Yep. And speaking of Letterkenny, next time there's a round of questions, somebody should ask Matt to play the didgeridoo.
This might be your last time on the show.
Thank you for joining us, Cleo. This was a treat. I hope if you didn't get your question answered, I don't really know what I can say to encourage you.
There were a lot of questions. We just couldn't get through them all.
Thank you for sending all the questions. That was great.
Oh, once again, I'm Chris Chappell.
I'm Shelley Jung.
I'm Matt Gnezda.
And I'm apologizing.